Welcome back to From the Shadow to the Light, the podcast that delves deep into the journey from darkness to enlightenment. Hi, I'm Debbie Gill, your guide on this transformative path of profound discovery and personal evolution. Today, we'll explore the theme of spiritual awakening and rebirth, a journey that often begins in the most unexpected moments when we are at our lowest, only to find that through surrender, we awaken to a higher power and a more profound truth within ourselves. As Eckhart Tolle beautifully puts it, the real spiritual awakening is when something emerges from within you that is deeper than who you thought you were. The person is still there, but one could almost say that something more powerful shines through the person. In this episode, I'll share my personal story of spiritual rebirth. This journey took me from a place of complete physical, emotional, and spiritual depletion to an awakening that transformed every aspect of my life. We'll dive into those defining moments, the visions and symbols that guided me, and the profound peace that comes when we truly surrender. Through the ups and downs of detox, the overwhelming feelings of unworthiness, and ultimately the unveiling of my authentic self, I discovered that true transformation begins within when we allow the light to break through the shadows we've hidden behind for so long. As you listen, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. What moments in your life have brought you to your knees? And what have you learned when you surrendered to something greater than yourself? Today, we'll explore how those moments of deep vulnerability can lead to the most profound awakenings. So let's begin this journey of rebirth, one step at a time. The beginning of surrender. Surrender is a word that carries many meanings. For some, it suggests defeat, weakness, or giving up in the face of struggle. But what if surrender could be something more profound? For me, surrender was not about giving up, but letting go. It was the first moment of peace I had experienced in years. In detox, I wasn't just surrendering physically. I was surrendering my spirit, releasing control on the life I had fought so hard to maintain, but which had been tearing me apart. My first day without a drink was June 6, 2000, D-Day, and I encountered something genuinely unexpected: gratitude. It wasn't gratitude for being in detox. I wasn't grateful for the meds, the doctors, or even the fact that my body was starting to stabilize. No, I felt gratitude simply because I didn't have to drink that day. It was the most basic sense of relief. For so long, the bottle had been my crutch, my escape, and my prison all at once. That feeling, gratitude for not having to drink, was the first seed of my healing. And that's when it hit me. I had been at war, not just with alcohol, but with myself, for years. I had been fighting a losing battle, trying to control what was beyond my ability to manage. But by surrendering, I wasn't fighting anymore. I was letting go. As a result, I found strength, the quiet, enduring strength that comes from accepting things as they are and trusting that something greater can carry you through. There's a phrase often spoken in recovery circles: we must surrender to win. It sounds paradoxical, but as I began to understand it, I realized that true strength doesn't come from fighting against life or trying to control everything. It comes from stepping back, releasing that tight grip, and allowing something bigger, something divine to take over. When I finally surrendered, I wasn't admitting defeat. I was giving myself permission to be free. This wasn't the end of my battle with alcohol, far from it. But in that moment, the war had shifted in my favor. I had been on my knees, brought down by the weight of my addiction. But through surrender, I was standing back up, not with my own strength, but with a new sense of clarity, a deeper understanding of what it meant to trust in something beyond myself. It's not about waving a white flag of defeat when you surrender. It's about raising that flag to signal a new beginning, one where you are no longer bound by the chains of your past or the relentless pursuit of control. It's about raising that flag to signal a new beginning, one where you are no longer bound by the chains of your past or the relentless pursuit of control. It's an invitation to let go, to allow healing to begin. Think about the areas in your life where you are still holding on, still resisting. What would it feel like to let go, to stop fighting against the current, and to allow yourself to be carried by the flow of life? Are there places where you've been equating surrender with defeat, when surrendering could be your most significant act of courage and strength? How has resistance, whether to a situation, a relationship, or even a part of yourself, held you back from growing or evolving? What might be possible if you released that resistance and trusted the process? The journey within. As detox progressed, I quickly realized that this wasn't just a physical recovery. Yes, my body was detoxifying, and the shakes, the tremors, and the cravings were slowly subsiding. But something else was stirring, a deeper kind of healing. This was no longer just a battle against alcohol. It became a journey into the very depths of my soul. It was though I was peeling back the layers of my life that I had hidden behind for years. For the first time, I began to see myself clearly, unfiltered, raw, and authentic. One pivotal moment came on the third day. I remember waking up, my body still trembling from withdrawal and my mind foggy from medication and fatigue. But beneath all of that, something was shifting. It wasn't just a physical awakening. I had come to in a more profound sense. I had come to spiritually. It was like seeing the world and myself through new eyes. The heaviness that had weighed on my spirit for so long started to lift, and in its place there was this quiet stillness, peace I hadn't felt in years. In that stillness, a realization emerged. I didn't have to fight this battle alone. For so long, I had been battling with my addiction, with myself, with life, struggling to control, to numb, to escape. But here, in the quiet of that moment, I understood I wasn't alone. God was with me. I had never truly been abandoned. I had just been too disconnected, too consumed by the chaos of addiction to feel the presence of something greater. This clarity, it wasn't just a fleeting feeling. It was like a light breaking through the darkness, illuminating a path forward. For the first time, I felt real hope. Not the kind of hope tied to external outcomes, but a hope that comes from deep within, a knowing that my life was about to change fundamentally. I didn't know what that change would look like, but I could feel it coming. The grip of alcohol was loosening, and I was beginning to reconnect with something I hadn't felt in a long time, my soul. I began to see the outlines of the person I once was, the one who had been buried under years of self-loathing, denial, and numbing behaviors. But more than that, I could sense the person I was becoming, the version of myself emerging from detox, from surrendering with a renewed purpose and reconnection to my soul. One of the most important lessons I learned during this process is that healing is not linear. It's not a straightforward path. It's a spiral, a journey inward where you revisit old wounds, peel more layers away, and confront the parts of yourself that you've been avoiding. And with each turn of the spiral, you gain more clarity, understanding, and peace. That moment of awakening on the third day was a turning point for me. It wasn't just about sobriety anymore. It was about reclaiming my soul, my purpose, my connection to the divine. I began to understand that the battle wasn't mine to fight alone. I could let go. I could trust that God would guide me and give me the strength I didn't even know I had. And from that moment forward, I knew my life would change forever. I wasn't just waking up to the fact that I needed to stop drinking. I was waking up to the truth of who I was at my core, a person worthy of healing, peace, and love. The clarity I experienced was like seeing the light at the end of a very long, dark tunnel. But more than that, I realized I wasn't walking through that tunnel alone. The divine was with me, guiding me every step of the way. When was the last time you experienced a moment of profound clarity or stillness? What did it reveal to you about your own path? How do you reconnect with your inner self when life feels overwhelming or chaotic? Are there practices or moments in your life where you feel that sense of stillness returning? What layers of your life might you need to peel back to see yourself more clearly, to reconnect with the core of who you are? Visions of healing. One of the most extraordinary and transformative parts of my journey happened during meditation. As I lay still with my head on a pillow, vivid images flooded my mind. These weren't just random pictures. They were deeply symbolic, carrying messages that resonated with my soul and guided me through my healing. The first vision was an eye. The only eye I knew was atop the pyramid on the back of a dollar bill. I discovered years later it was the third eye, a powerful symbol of intuition and insight. It was a gateway to a higher awareness, allowing me to see beyond the surface of my struggles. It was as if my soul was awakening, opening me to deeper truths I hadn't been able to access before. Then came the rippling water, expanding outward in gentle waves. This water symbolized renewal, but it also represented the ripple effect of my actions, the impact my addiction had on those around me, and the healing that would now ripple through my life and theirs. Next, I saw faces, unfamiliar, nameless faces floating in and out of my vision. These faces reflected the different versions of myself I had become throughout my life, shaped by the roles and masks I wore to survive. None of them was really me. They were all constructs I had developed to cope with the pain of addiction and the self I had hidden for so long. But the most impactful vision came next. I first saw soldiers fighting in the Civil War using rifles and cannons. Then the images of the war in Afghanistan with soldiers in tanks using howitzers appeared. The significance of these two conflicts was not immediately apparent. However, I began to understand that these two wars represented my battles with alcohol. The Civil War soldiers symbolized my first battle, the early years of my struggle when I fought hard to overcome my drinking problem. But just as there was a long time between the Civil War and the Afghanistan War, there was a lengthy gap between my two battles with alcohol, 17 years in fact. During those years, I wasn't actively drinking, but I was living as what's often called a dry drunk. I had stopped drinking, but I didn't change. I hadn't addressed the core issues that led me to alcohol in the first place. Those 17 years were not years of peace, although they may have appeared that way. Even though I wasn't drinking, I was still living in the same emotional prison. I was still the same person, critical, judgmental, angry, full of unresolved pain. I didn't carry the visible scars of battle, but the war inside me had never ended. When I saw the Afghanistan war in my vision, I realized it represented my second battle with alcohol, more recent but fiercer. It made me realize I had never won it. The enemy was still there, waiting for me, and it had re-emerged, forcing me to confront the addiction and the unresolved pain I had buried for so long. These wars symbolized the ongoing nature of my struggle with addiction. The battles were years apart, but they were connected. My dry drunk years were like a ceasefire, a break in the fighting, but not true peace. I hadn't transformed. I had only paused the war. Now, in recovery, I was finally ready to face these battles in a new way, armed with the awareness and tools I needed to truly heal. What made these visions so profound wasn't just the imagery and how they reflected my personal journey. They showed me that my battle with alcohol wasn't just a single isolated event. It was a long cyclical struggle I had to keep facing until I found real peace. The soldiers reminded me that even after years of not drinking, I wasn't sober until I made the internal changes that would free me from the chains of addiction. In surrendering to these visions, I understood that my healing wasn't just about stopping drinking. It was about changing who I was at my core. These two wars weren't just symbols of my past. They guided me toward the transformation I was now ready to embrace. Have you ever had a vision or dream that felt more meaningful than it seemed at first glance? How did it guide you? Are there battles in your life that seem to resurface after long periods of what feels like peace? How can you recognize and address them on a deeper level? Unmasking and reclaiming my true self. As I progressed deeper into my recovery, I found myself at a crossroads in group therapy. This was the moment I was forced to confront the parts of myself that I had hidden away for years, the parts I had never wanted to face. It was as if I had been living my life behind a series of masks that had once served a purpose, but now kept me from truly knowing and accepting myself. The masks I wore, strong, addict, perfectionist, were all different personas I had developed to survive. Each mask represented a role I had taken on in response to the pain and chaos of my life. They were ways to cope, ways to protect myself from vulnerability, but they also became walls between me and my true self. Over time, these roles hardened, and I started believing that these masks were who I was. In group therapy, I began the complicated process of peeling back these masks one by one. It wasn't easy. Each mask had been carefully crafted and worn for so long that I had grown attached to them. They had provided a sense of safety and control in a chaotic and unpredictable world. But now, in recovery, they were suffocating me. They prevented me from connecting with others, and more importantly, from connecting with myself. One of the modalities used in the integrated recovery process directly reflected the visions I had earlier in my meditation. I had seen the drama masks of comedy and tragedy, symbols of the roles I had played throughout my life, slowly slide away, revealing the faces underneath. In therapy, the same thing was happening on a deeper emotional level. The masks I had worn for so long, the strong one who never asked for help, the addict who used substances to numb the pain, the perfectionist who was always striving but never felt good enough, were slipping away, revealing the raw, vulnerable person underneath. This unmasking wasn't just an intellectual exercise, it was a deeply embodied experience. I could feel the weight of these roles lifting off my shoulders, but I also feared letting them go. Without these masks, who was I? Who would I be if I wasn't constantly trying to project strength, control, or perfection? It was terrifying to think about it, but also liberating. For the first time in years, I had the opportunity to discover my true self, free from the personas I had clung to for so long. As each mask came off, I stepped closer to my authentic self, the person I was meant to be, not the person I had become in response to trauma, addiction, and self-doubt. It was as if the layers of false identity were being peeled away. Underneath, I found someone I hadn't seen in years, a person who was worthy of love, of peace, and of a life free from the chains of addiction. This process of unmasking was at the core of my spiritual awakening. It wasn't just about removing the outer layers, it was about reclaiming the parts of myself that I had abandoned. I realized that I had spent so much of my life performing, trying to be what I thought the world wanted me to be, that I had lost sight of who I was. The masks had been necessary at one point, but now they were holding me back from the freedom I desperately needed. I'd always considered myself strong, but in recovery I learned that true strength doesn't come from putting on a mask. It comes from the willingness to be vulnerable and show the world who you are, even if it feels risky or uncomfortable. I had been a perfectionist, always striving to meet some unattainable standard. Now I understood that perfection was a mask I wore to avoid feeling being judged or rejected. The addict mask had been the hardest to remove because it was tied to so much shame. Underneath it, I found a person who was worthy of redemption, worthy of healing. The spiritual awakening I was experiencing wasn't just a mental shift, but something I felt in my body, heart, and soul. It was a reconnection with my true self, the person I had been all along but had forgotten. Each mask I removed made me feel lighter, freer, and more alive. I began to see that the roles I had been playing weren't my true identity. They were survival mechanisms that I no longer needed. As I let go of these masks, I began stepping into my authentic self with clarity and purpose. I started to believe that I didn't have to be perfect to be loved. I didn't have to be strong all the time. I didn't have to hide between addiction to cope with the pain. I could be me, flawed, imperfect, vulnerable, and still worthy of love and acceptance. This process of unmasking wasn't just about healing from addiction. It was about reclaiming my true self. It was about learning to embrace all parts of me, even the ones I had been ashamed of or tried to hide. It was about stepping into the light, fully aware of my strengths and weaknesses, and knowing I no longer had to hide. What masks are you still wearing, and what do they protect you from? Are these masks serving or holding you back from being your true self? How can you begin the unmasking process of letting go of the roles you no longer need to play? What would it feel like to step into your authentic self, free from the expectations and personas you've created? A new beginning. The spiritual awakening I experienced wasn't the final chapter of my story. It marked the beginning of an entirely new phase of my life. It was like the sun rising after a long night, bathing everything in a fresh light. I had been given a gift that came in the form of trust. Trust in God, trust in the universe, and most importantly, trust in myself. Before this awakening, my life had been driven by fear. Fear of failure, rejection, and not being enough. I had relied on external things to numb that fear, whether it was alcohol, perfectionism, or wearing masks to hide my true self. But now, for the first time, I felt a profound sense of trust that I had never experienced before. It was as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I realized that I didn't have to control everything. I could let go, surrender, and trust that I was being guided towards something greater. This trust became the foundation upon which I would rebuild my life. It wasn't blind faith, but a deep inner knowing that I wasn't alone, no matter what challenges I faced. I was supported by something much larger than myself, a higher power that had been with me all along, even when I couldn't see it. This realization gave me a sense of peace and hope that I hadn't felt in years. Buddha once said, "Everything can change in the blink of an eye." And for me, that change had come suddenly and unexpectedly. One moment I was consumed by fear and self-doubt, and the next I was filled with clarity and purpose. But I also know that with this awakening came a responsibility to continue the work of healing and growth. It wasn't enough to have this moment of clarity. I had to actively nurture it, take what I had learned and apply it to my daily life. This new beginning wasn't just about sobriety. It meant living with purpose, authenticity, and alignment with my higher self. My journey was no longer defined by what I had been through, but by where I was going, toward a life rooted in my true values and beliefs. Though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, I felt ready. Healing is an ongoing process, but now I have the tools, surrender, trust, and inner guidance to navigate it. Instead of fear, I felt curiosity. I knew there would be challenges, but I also knew I had the strength to face them. After years of hiding, I was ready to live fully and step into the light of my true self. This awakening wasn't just for me. I realized I was meant to share what I had learned, to be a source of light for others. No longer driven by fear, I was guided by a deep connection to the divine. I wasn't just recovering, I was transforming, ready to use my story to help others find their own path to healing. What new beginnings are waiting for you? What part of your life asks for renewal? And how can you take the first step toward embracing that change? How can trust in something greater than yourself, God, the universe, or your inner wisdom, help you move forward? What would it look like to live a life aligned with your true purpose? And how can you begin to take small steps in that direction? As we reach the end of this episode, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on everything we've explored together. This journey of spiritual awakening, unmasking, and rebirth does not happen all at once. It's a continuous process of peeling back the layers, confronting the shadows, and stepping more fully into the light of who we truly are. The path of awakening isn't always easy. It's filled with moments of uncertainty, letting go, and surrendering control. But in these moments, when we feel most vulnerable, we also find the strength we didn't know we had. The journey to heal and rediscover ourselves can be long, but each step brings us closer to our authentic selves and the light we were meant to live. Today, we've walked through the process of surrendering, peeling away the masks, and learning to trust again, not just in God or the universe, but in ourselves. We've uncovered the powerful truth that real change begins from within. This awakening has been a new beginning for me, but it is also an invitation to you. Wherever you are in your journey, know that you can transform and release what no longer serves you and step into a life of purpose, love, and light. This process isn't about arriving at some perfect version of ourselves. It's about embracing the messy, imperfect, and beautiful growth process. It's about learning to trust that every struggle, setback, and step has meaning and purpose, even if we can't always see it now. I invite you to reflect on your own path. Where are you being called to surrender? Where are you being asked to trust? And how can you begin to unmask, to let go of the roles you've been playing and step more fully into the person you were always meant to be? As we bid farewell to this chapter of our journey, let us carry forward the lessons learned, the wisdom gained, and the hope that burns brightly within us. For in the end, it is not the destination that matters, but the journey itself, the journey of exploring our hearts and stepping into the light of our true potential. Until next time, keep nurturing your inner light and embracing the beauty of the path you walk. May you find strength in your struggles and joy in your triumphs. And remember, even in the darkest moments, a spark of light is always waiting to be discovered. Thank you for listening to this episode of From the Shadow to the Light. I'm grateful for your presence on this journey, and I look forward to walking with you again. Join me next time as we explore the 12 steps and beyond, diving deeper into the steps that guide us through recovery and toward living a life of true freedom and purpose.